Good morning. It is 10:59 a.m. on Sunday, September 27th, 2020. I'm Christiana Ellis, and I've gotten a little bit of a slow start this morning because of a migraine, but this is still 5 more minutes, and it is still Sunday, which means that I'm continuing my rewatch of The Legend of Korra, now beginning Book 3, Change, with Episode 1, A Breath of Fresh Air. And I have to say, the episode title is fitting because, I mean, obviously it's thematically appropriate based on the story, but also, in some ways, it's a breath of fresh air. This episode feels refreshing. Uh, I talked pretty frankly about my, feelings in book two, and I'm certainly not the only one. That even though when I watched it through the first time, I was just kind of enough in the moment that I didn't really criticize individual story decisions. But on a rewatch, there's definitely things about book two that feel, forced or contrived and that sort of thing. And to reiterate something that crystallized for me when I read some essays about the show from Film Crit Hulk, a lot of the problem is that so much of the conflict in book two was actually not about the actual central issue. It was about busy work, almost. Like, we have to give the characters something to struggle against, and for now, until we're ready to have them do the real thing. And so much of that just kind of felt inauthentic. And, we're just dealing with some of the watching Korra and Mako fail to have a successful relationship, and all of that sort of thing is a little frustrating. Dealing with okay, Korra's taken in by a shady teacher again. Unalak's whole motivation being a little suspect, but there are definitely good things about book two, but it had some issues, and so in this season, it immediately begins with some of what was one of the early criticisms of book two. Like, if you recall, in book two, we begin, and there is virtually no discussion of any ramifications or lasting effects from the things that happened in book one. We have a new president, President Raiko, who is a non-bender, and in theory, if you really squint and look between the lines, we know that it's okay, well, part of the after effects of the Equalist Revolution was that instead of the city being ruled by a council of only benders, we now have a non-bender as president instead, presumably elected. Although we don't see any of that process. There's really not even anything discussed about it. You can sort of see that happened, they maybe had a conversation about it, but none of it's dramatized. None of it's put on screen. And so it just really felt like, okay, no, I guess we're not interested in actually resolving any of that stuff. We're just in a hurry to move on to the next thing. Okay. But in this episode, we deal with the after effects of the big changes wrought at the end of the last book. And when I talked about the finale last week of book two, that one of the things that I did really admire about the story they told in book two was that they were willing to let the characters make big decisions that would actually really change the world, and not just be reactive and trying to always restore the status quo alone. There's actual in-story interrogation of the idea of the first instinct is, someone's doing a bad thing, we just have to undo their bad thing and put everything, quote unquote, back to normal, right? And we further evaluate that here, but first and foremost, what are we dealing with? Well, the world is different now. The spirit world and the spirit wilds and the human world are not separated anymore, and that matters. It makes a difference in people's lives, and for a lot of people who are not especially tuned into all of this to begin with, that change is pretty unpleasant. It's very inconvenient, and they're angry, and like, frankly, it's hard to blame them from their perspective. You know, if you are just living in a city trying to get your, get to your job and put food on the table and all of that, and all of a sudden now you're homeless because your building is filled with spirit vines because the avatar made a decision far away, I could understand why people would be very frustrated about that. Especially because they just haven't had time to learn or understand the possible good things that can come from this whole thing. And it's quite possible that what good does come might not actually do good for the individual person who's got kicked out of their building by vines. We'll come to what Tenzin says a little bit later, but yeah, that's one of the things that I really like immediately in the story here is that while the story isn't necessarily saying that Korra made the wrong decision, it's not afraid to show that there are major consequences that do matter to people, and it was a meaningful choice, is the point. And so I think that's interesting. But we actually begin the episode with a surprising revelation, which is on the good side of the scale, which is we see Boomy chasing down his little spirit buddy Boomjun and trying to persuade him to try on this little sweater he knitted, which is ridiculous but fun. And then he's falling off a cliff because he's chasing the spirit. And for one, there's a moment that's just a little throwaway moment, but I really love it, is that Boomju was flying away from Boomy, which is why he climbed out on this tree branch to begin with. But then when the tree branch started to fall, Boomju did try to help him, even though it was ineffective because he's a little tiny spirit and a big guy. So, but there's a moment there where even though Boomju had been fleeing before, does come back to try to help, which is just, it's sweet. But it's like, oh no, Boomy's falling, But then, airbending. Boomy's airbending. What? And so that's, that starts one big, initial mystery and surprise. But then, we check in with Korra, and she's struggling. She's trying to help remove some of the more inconvenient vines, but it's just not going well. Firebending isn't working. And then she, checks in with President Raiko, who's giving a press conference, and, people are mad about all these vines. And Korra is forced to basically go and tell them, I'm sorry, I'm trying, but I'm not successful yet. And they're all basically jumping down her throat about, you did this is your fault, you need to fix it. And there's a point where Korra, because this is, who Korra is, does get a little frustrated and snaps back and just say, oh, I'm sorry. Should I have just left things alone and let you deal with the gigantic dark spirit avatar monster that was about to destroy your city? Incidentally, I think there's one little detail that I don't think was ever shown on screen or addressed, is that, who put the statue of Aang back up? Because it's definitely up in the background, but Unalaq, Unavatu knocked it down, so someone put it back up, I guess. They've got earthbenders. Maybe it's not that hard compared to what it would take in real world. But in any event, and it just goes to show in a fairly authentic way, I think, that even though Korra did actually save the world, people's gratitude for that goes away very quickly, if they ever even had it at all, which again is not an entirely, we can't blame the people too much for that, because they didn't see any of that. For all they know, Unavatu showing up, for all they know, that wouldn't have happened except for the Avatar either, right? All of this stuff related to the Avatar just causes problems from their perspective, right? So even though that wasn't Korra's fault, even though, technically, if she hadn't opened the Southern Spirit Portal for Unalaq, when she did, if she had seen through him sooner, but we don't need to get into that. The point is that even though she did this amazing thing for everybody, they don't care because now they've got to go to work and there's a vine blocking the expressway that they usually take. And so, she can't help with that, and it's frustrating for everybody, and, you know, it's, it's a struggle, right? But now let's talk a little bit about Korra and Asami, because Asami shows up to kind of console Korra as she's frustrated after this press conference. And here's the thing. I suspect that most people who watch these recaps have seen the show and are not actually worried about spoilers. But I will say for right now, I've hinted at it before. I'm gonna go ahead. I think I've already said this before, but I'm just gonna always treat it a bit like a spoiler whenever I talk about it. I am going to spoil something that happens at the end of the series, but honestly, in my opinion, it's better to know it than to be surprised by it at the end. So if you really want to avoid spoilers, I would say skip ahead 2 minutes. But otherwise, I don't think you need to. That's my opinion, but up to you. So one of the things that drove me bonkers when the big thing happened at the end of the series, which is that, Korra and Asami end up together, is that there were all sorts of people who said, where did this come from? This came out of nowhere. And I'm like, what are you talking about? How can anyone watch this episode and then feel at the, and then for that matter, watch all of this season and next season and then think that that ending comes out of nowhere? It's obvious that they're developing this relationship between them. Now, it's fair. It could have been just platonic friendship. It didn't have to be romantic. But it's clear that there is a connection there and there's a relationship with an intimacy between Korra and Asami that was just frankly never present with either of them, with Mako. And so it seems like I watched this episode and I say, it seems really obvious to me. Or at the very least, the potential is clearly there. And so, that's why it drives me wild when anyone tries to say it came out of nowhere at the end, like they forced it in right at the end. And I'm like, what? No. Anyway. But so I love seeing Korra and Asami interacting as friends and moving past the teen drama angst of their love triangle with Mako and being just connected with each other. I think the one other detail that this episode doesn't really cover is exactly what's going on with Asami right now, because like Bolin, it seems like she's just hanging out at Air Temple Island being part of Team Avatar now, which certainly seems like a valid way to go. But it's a reasonable question based on the events of Book 2 is she still running Future Industries? What's up with Varric, who escaped from prison, but in theory still owns it? Or owns controlling interest, because he bought her out? So that's a question that doesn't get answered in this episode, which ultimately I don't have a big problem with because the emotional stakes of just her relationship with everybody else is more interesting anyway. But, we don't know that yet at this point. We just know that she and Bolin are both staying at Air Temporal Island, but Mako is not. He's sleeping at the police station because he is not as past the teeny popper love triangle stuff as Korra and Asami are. He needs to focus on work, and it feels weird to live at your ex-girlfriend's house with your other ex-girlfriend. I get that, honestly. It's we could say he could, grow up a little bit and get past that, but it's not nothing. But Bolin is certainly enjoying himself. And so we get a little bit of, there's more with Korra and Asami later when, Asami is teaching Korra how to drive the car. And, they're just talking, they get through all of the stuff about no secrets from each other anymore. They're both kind of agreeing that they're moving past and forgiving any of the stuff that went on between them when Mako was involved, and just kind of like now Asami's just helping out and just kind of trying to be there and be supportive for Korra, and to say, like, it's understandable that the people are frustrated, but you did the right thing, and we're supportive, and let's just try to see what we can do from here, and so she is doing exactly what Korra got so mad at Mako for not doing all those years, which is to say, yeah, let's acknowledge that what you're dealing with is a real problem, and it's understandable that it's frustrating and upsetting, and I hear you, and yeah, so that sucks. Let's work together to figure out something to do, and that sort of dynamic was what Mako struggled with over and over and over again last season. Which, and just, again, it's like, it just goes to show again how the dynamic is different between them. But we have Korra and Asami encounter a spirit who's also mad, so it's not just the people who are mad, some of the spirits are mad too, which is kind of a fun detail, and that gives Korra this idea of trying her spirit bending trick that she learned from Unalaq on some of these vines, and it initially seems to work, but then comes back worse, and they have to rescue a bunch of people from another building right there in front of the President Raiko, and it looks bad, and it's also just increasingly like, gosh, this is a real problem. This is not a, gosh, we just need to figure something out and then it'll be fine. This is like, this is not fine. That's how it kind of feels at that moment. In the meantime, though, we also have the other plot lines of Bumi first struggling to persuade Tenzin and the rest of the family there that he really can airbend now, because he can't do it on command. His idea, maybe I can only do it when I'm in danger. Someone, Bolin, hurl a big boulder at me, and then it's like, nobody's hurling boulders at anybody. But then Milo, because of course he would, cooperatively hurls a plate at Bumi, and sure enough, catches it. And so the reveal that Bumi is now an airbender, and like their first discussions are like, was he always and just never manifested it before, like he's a late bloomer? Was it because he was inside the spirit world during harmonic convergence? What is it? But then they learn it's not just Bumi. There's this report of this other guy that Mako encounters who was not a bender before, but now apparently is an airbender and can't control it. And so now we have this prospect from Tenzin that, like, if it's not just Bumi, there would be potentially other explanations for it, but also just random people. Who knows how many there might be? Maybe one of the consequences of the joining of the spirit world and the human world is that, in addition to all these vines that are so inconvenient, what if airbending is returning to the world? And that's this amazing higher level thing, that the prospect of having a people again and having it not just be Tenzin and his kids. And he has this great conversation with them about, like, Ikki's like, am I going to have to share my room? And that sort of thing. But Tenzin is just feeling the emotions of, like, wishing that his dad could have seen that. And, and that lets us all briefly just imagine Aang and his distress when he realized he was the only airbender left. And now to be looking at the prospect of a whole nation, maybe there's enough people to fill the temples again. And it's just this amazing thing, this world-changing thing, right? And so all of a sudden, while the vines are not it's not that the vines aren't a real problem, because they are, but it's only one side of the coin. And so when we have Korra returning, trying to meditate, and it's in the same little gazebo where she had her meditating lesson back in book 1, and she's struggling, and we have Tenzin come and talk to her, and is a very mature and nuanced conversation there about just recognizing, like, Korra, you're not the president of Republic City. Fixing all of their day-to-day problems is not your job. You saved the world, and you made a decision based on what you thought was best for the whole world. And no matter what that is, there's going to be someone who doesn't like it. And, you've made a big change to the world, and no matter what that change is, someone won't like it. Even if you had put it back, there would be people. So the problem there is that, like, if you had just returned things to normal, as so many people say they want, it closes off the possibility of all of these new things that are possible now, which, ties into the end of the episode. But, him just saying, for all that President Raiko is angry with you and the people of Republic City are frustrated, I am overjoyed because airbending is returning to the world in a way that it hasn't for generations. And it's because of what you did. And so he's basically just saying, change. Things do change. And you can't always put things back the way they were. All you can do is try to have the changes be good where you can, and to, adapt. And it's great. It's this really great conversation for them. And, Korra feels a little better. And, so they're interrupted by Bolin coming in to tell about this other airbender who's, struggling to control his airbending, and he's made his way up on top of the bridge, and everyone's worried, so they have to go rescue him. And there's a great bit where they take some of the other bits of the conversation that Tenzin and Korra had just had, where they're talking about how she can't connect to the wisdom of the old avatars anymore, that it's a new age that has started, and that, change can be good or bad depending on your point of view. And then it all gets recycled into a neat little comic exchange with Bolin, where it's like, oh, I'm sorry, did I interrupt an Avatar wisdom session? And she says, the age of Avatar wisdom is over. And he's like, is that a good thing? And she says, depending on your point of view. Which is just like, yay! It's just a deft little writing touch. And so then they go to the bridge, and we have Korra basically talk this guy off the bridge. Well, sort of. She gets him to the point of saying, he's one of the things that's really interesting and I think realistic in this conversation is that for all that Tenzin and Bumi and the other airbenders are really excited at the prospect of new airbenders, this guy, he's like the other people in Republic City. Like, this is not a welcome change for him. It's like, for a lot of us, I think we sort of imagine the idea of like, oh, but you get a superpower. But he's feeling like, I was just some guy, and now I have this and I can't control it. I want this to go away. And here's where she's kind of saying, I don't think I can. Well, I think, for one, we can briefly say, I mean, she probably could, right? Like with the Avatar state, she could theoretically take someone's bending away, but she wouldn't want to yet anyway, because it's like, come on, this is brand new, let's just give it a chance. Let's not undo this big thing that's happening just because you're scared of it in the moment. But in any event, she says she can't do it, but she can promise, there are other airbenders. They want to help you. Let's give them a chance to help you, and it can get better, and it gets better, right? And so, she gets him to the point where he's going to take her hand, but then he falls. She rescues him. Oh, and it's a good reminder that she's got the glider staff now, like Aang had, and it's just such a cool little gizmo that lets her fly around when she wants, and also reflects her, continuing improvement in her own airbending mastery. But yeah, so she saves him. Yay, hooray! Except now President Raiko has shown up, and he's still mad. He's basically made the decision. You've caused nothing but trouble since you've arrived. Which again, we want to say, hey Raiko, you know what was true when she arrived is that you weren't president yet, and now you are. It's because she put down this equalist revolution that, and then that led to the Bending Council being replaced by this elected presidency, which you have the title of now. So, like, nothing but trouble since she arrived. But also, he's like a politician, and I think it's a reminder now that it's like we can understand where he's coming from. But we can also say, Korra's got a higher responsibility than to make him happy. And so when he says, that's it, I'm ejecting you from the city, she's not even mad. Because she had already made the decision, I wasn't going to stay anyway, because there are airbenders in the world now. We have to find them, and we have to help them, and we have to see what we can build with this new world we have. And it's really lovely, and Tenzin's going to come too, and we're going to have, we have our arc for the season of building a new airbending nation, right? But then we have the stinger on the episode. And one thing I'll say too is that I am an absolute sucker for the trope of the supervillain prison, where you have to have all these really elaborate procedures to keep people imprisoned. And now we meet Zahir, who is now also an airbender. And so one of the things that I think is important to consider, because the episode doesn't really put a button on it, is that this super prison that he's in was for him before he was a bender. Like, he was not a bender. And they still felt like he needed to be on this type of prison cell where he's all by himself. He's out on this pillar of rock that they have to use bending to extend a bridge out to give him rice. The Order of the White Lotus keeps him there. And so it's like, that was from before he was a bender, and now he's a bender. Now he's an airbender. And so we've got, I know a lot of people are really excited that it's Henry Rollins doing the voice. I mean, I don't object to Henry Rollins, but I guess I just never kind of knew about him before this. So, like, I think Zahir's a good villain. But we begin, with his escape here. And there's a fun little bit in the commentary on this episode where they point out that there's kind of a plot hole where when he, puts the guards into that prison cell and says, make that rice last. It'll be 3 weeks till they bring more. First of all, it seems implausible already that they only brought him rice every 3 weeks. Like, is it cooked rice? What's going on there? But whatever. It's not important, because the whole point, too, is that it doesn't even make any sense, because there's another tower just across where the bridge extended from. So it's like... But in any case, Zahir has now escaped, and it's a point that, change is change. It's not automatically good or bad. And the idea that, oh my gosh, there's all these new airbenders in the world. Except that here's the thing. There's no guarantee that all of them are going to be good people. Bum, bum, bum. So, that is it for this episode. So next week, we'll be talking about Book 3, Episode 2, Rebirth. And I'll talk to you all tomorrow for 5 more minutes.